As readers of literature, it can often be difficult for us to get a handle on the relationship between books and history. On the one hand, we are always attuned to the past. We read books from the past, we study books about the past, and we know that the books we read are shaped by historical conditions that inform what literature was written and who wrote it. On the other hand, we think of great literature as timeless, as forming a conversation that transcends time and place in order to speak to all readers at all times in an enduring, lasting voice. The relationship between literature and history is therefore both inherent and ambivalent. How do we think about literary history? Should it be an important part of our critical interpretation and textual engagement? Harold Bloom's theory of poetic influence, which we will look at in detail in the next lesson, offers an integrated way of thinking about literary creativity and the textual tradition. His model places literary history and poetic tradition at the heart of textual composition by collapsing three important binaries: reading and writing, originality and imitation, primacy and succession. Each of these pairs would appear to be opposites, but Bloom's theory of literary influence helps us grasp a more subtle, nuanced relationship between literary creativity and poetic tradition that complicates or even erases the distinction between apparent opposites. First off, we are familiar with what it is to read, and we think we know what it is to write. But Bloom asserts that any attempt to write poetry is necessarily also an act of reading, or as he argues, misreading earlier writers, whom he calls precursor poets. This is not only because many of our best interpreters of literature are also those who write it, although this is undeniably true, but more fundamentally, because to write great poetry is to read the tradition and contend with it in order to find one's own place within it. There is no such thing as ahistorical literary creativity, Bloom suggests, because of the second misleading dichotomy: originality and imitation. All writers seek to be original, not derivative, but in their search to be original, in trying to offer a more compelling, innovative, and creative representation of life and the human condition, they end up offering not an unprecedented, mimetic, or lifelike account of experience, but instead yet another imitation of existing texts. According to Bloom, poets don't so much copy from nature, but imitate each other. To seek poetic originality is always to imitate. As T.S. Eliot said, immature poets imitate, mature poets steal. A poet may begin trying to innovate something new, but will always end up writing what to them, based on their own reading, sounds like a poem. This scrambles, finally, the relationship between primacy and succession. To be first always sounds better, and Bloom certainly believes that authors are formed in relationship to literary tradition. But the arena of poetic creativity, what we might call the agon of textual production, is necessarily antagonistic. Later writers may try to contend with and fight off the literary influence of earlier poets, but successors also rewrite their precursors. For example, after the rebellion of modernist poets, we can't quite read classical authors the same way. Poetic antagonism cuts both ways and is part and parcel of the literary tradition. How exactly this functions is the subject of our next lesson. I hope you will listen to it after reading the assigned excerpts by Bloom and others.